We want to welcome you here. Thank you for attending the UVU Conference on Mental Health. This session is going to go from 11:30 to 12:30, and then we will have a lunch break at that point. For the questions from the audience, one thing that will help is if you want to ask a question, if you stand up and because I'm going to be sitting this direction, so if you stand up and kind of wave your hand, usually the presenter will see you and then kind of walk over to you, but I'm going to try and beat them there and get you a microphone because it's really helpful when you speak into the microphone so that the whole audience can hear you. So if you have a question, I'll be up here and I'll try and keep an eye on the audience, and you'll just want to stand up and kind of wave your hand so we can get a microphone to you. This presentation, the title of this is How to Help Someone with Depression Using Simple Science, and the presenter is Boone Christensen. I'm going to read a short bio and then you can go ahead and begin. So Boone Christensen is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the owner of Steps Family Therapy in Provo. He specializes in trauma-informed approaches such as EMDR, somatic experiencing, and internal family systems. His work also emphasizes systemic changes that allow for significant and long-term healing to occur, often by teaching family members how to become knowledgeable and validating therapeutic helpers. Okay, you're welcome to begin.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm very excited to be here. Happy to be presenting with you guys. I think I'll start with just a little bit about myself. I grew up military, moved around a number of places. We lived in California, Guam, Florida, and Italy before my family ended up back in Utah. I went to high school at Timpview High School, just over in North Provo. I went on to BYU and got a degree in sociocultural anthropology, with an emphasis in African nonprofit development, agricultural nonprofit development. So I spent a number of summers living with tribes and farming fields in a couple places in sub-Saharan Africa. Due to a turn of events that I won't go over right now, I ended up applying to marriage and family therapy master's programs and ended up at Auburn University in Alabama. And now I'm here, hoping to share something useful with you guys today. A lot of my associateship, the 2 or so years after you finish graduate school, was spent studying. My wife, my lovely wife, Caprina, who's here today and maybe helping us out a little bit, she's also a therapist. She was going through her grad school at the same time I was in my associateship. So it meant if I wanted to get my hours, I couldn't spend it working because I was working part-time while she was in school. So I spent lots of time reading. And hopefully, just from all that extra reading time, I can convey something helpful to you guys today. I want to know a little bit about the demographic here. I'm wondering how many of you are mental health professionals? Okay, that is the majority. How many are people from the neighborhood who just love not mental health professionals or students? Couple people? Great. Love that. How many are students? Current students. Wow. Not as many students as I was expecting. When I submitted the proposal for this presentation, I submitted it as a proposal to a lay audience. So the terms we're going to use today are pretty simple, but I think that'll be important for us. If we want to get more complicated, we want more numbers and big words and stuff, I'm sure we can definitely start that conversation, but I want this presentation to be flexible. To cater to our needs. And I want to have lots of time for questions and discussion. I like thinking of a conference as a conference where we get to confer. So I guess one of the things that hopefully we can get out of today's presentation about depression are useful ways to teach our clients about depression, ways to reframe it that instill hope, right? That can instill possibility of change, of a better future. A lot of the stuff I'm presenting today, I wouldn't consider new material. I wouldn't consider them my original ideas. I think they're principles that have been around for a long time, but that have been lost in kind of the noise of psychological research. So, to start, I'd like us to just look at what we tend to think of as depression, right? The DSM diagnosis. We have 9 criteria there: depressed mood, diminished interest, changes in appetite, slowing down, loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness, inability to think, right? And if you have 5 of those 9 things for persistently over a period of 2 weeks, then you get a diagnosis of major depressive disorder. But this is not what depression is. This is what depression looks like. So the first thing I'd like to do here is reframe what depression actually is from the description of it in our medical manuals to what we observe in a very, I guess, literal and more scientific sense. So a lot of us have seen these pictures before, couldn't find great renditions of them, but they demonstrate a very real difference of something going on inside a depressed brain as opposed to a non-depressed brain. And in this first picture, the side view, I just want to point out the reduced activity in the upper cortex, right? The outer cortex, the part that makes us human, our logical functioning, our clear thinking, our relational thinking. I'll refer a lot to our mirror neurons, which are right in the front of our forehead. That's where we really get to be people. So there's reduced activity there. There's reduced activity in our emotion centers, right? We'll feel more flat. We'll feel more, less emotional. We'll feel more heavy because there's less going on with our other functions. The activity is more centered around the brainstem, which we'll talk about more here in a second. And of course, just less activity going on in the brain overall. This is really happening. A lot of our discussion will be based around our simple 3-brain model, a la Dan Siegel. If you are, fans of the hand-brain model there, I think it's super useful. Definitely makes psychology a lot more, understandable. And we'll just go through the basic functions of these 3 different parts of the brain, right? As we said, in the logical function, we have abstract reasoning. We have the ability to challenge. We have the ability to do things. I like to frame these in terms of what we're able to do in these parts of the brain. When you're up here and you're feeling good, calm, safe, logical, clear-headed, you're able to do non-essential things. Right? You're able to engage in your hobbies. You're able to learn things. You're able to challenge yourself. You go to the gym because you want to, right? You go take a class because you want to. You engage in relationships because it's fun and interesting, right? Non-essential, I don't need these to live right now, but I'm going to do them just because I'm a human, right? And I want to. Fight or flight part of the brain, around the limbic system. That's where we're able to do essential tasks, meaning what do I have to do, right? I have to go to work. I have to get through class. I have to pass my classes. And that's really what life kind of looks like in that state, is you're just getting by. What is the bare minimum I can do to survive, to feel okay, to get a little sense of well-being? That's the fight or flight state, right? Chronic anxiety, we might say. The freeze state, the depressed state. This is where even the essential tasks don't feel important. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to work, right? Even if in the long term that's something that, right, I might need to sustain myself. Down in that part of the brain, we literally only have access to our pons, medulla oblongata, brainstem. These are our heart and lung functions. We can literally just sit there and breathe, right? And this is kind of a hard state to engage with, especially as a therapist. Someone sitting in your room on your couch, and they only have access to their heart and lung functions. And you're trying to challenge their thoughts, right? You're trying to convince them to get up and do behaviors that will make them better. But the thing is, there's no electricity up there. No wonder it doesn't work to try and push someone in that state. So let's talk about what this looks like in animals, right? Because all mammals have some version of these three functions. Obviously humans have the largest amount of mass in our logical area, but animals have fight or flight and freeze. And they actually move through them the same way that humans do. A lot of this knowledge is drawn from the somatic experiencing model of therapy, for those who are familiar with that. So, what induces freeze state in an animal? So, let's think about it. What are the things that are threats to our survival that would make it adaptive to divert all energy from my peripheral muscles and my outer brain? Do you guys realize that our brains consume a fifth of all our calories? They use tons of gasoline, right? And especially the outer brain, right? Our logical functions consume a ton of energy. So why would it be adaptive to divert all of our resources to just maintaining a slow heart rate and lung function? Well, if there's a nutrient deficiency, right? We don't have enough building materials to keep those other functions going. There's a scarcity of food, maybe. One of the hallmark depressive functions among animals is hibernation. If it's snowy outside, no food, it's dark, it's cold. Why would I exert gasoline to go out and find no food? That'd be a silly thing to do in the middle of winter for a mammal. It's actually adaptive to get depressed, hide in the cave, cuddle up, and before that happens, consume some delicious high-calorie foods, right, to help us get through the winter. And guess what, humans? We have this too. Are you starting to feel it in your bones? As the days get a little bit darker, that desire to eat delicious things and wrap yourself in warm things and watch warm, cuddly Hallmark movies. The Danish use the word hygge to describe this sensation. It is our natural depressive function kicking in. It becomes a problem when we feel ashamed of it. Okay, the persistent threat. Are there predators all around everywhere? Do you need to hide in your hole a lot? Lack of stimulation. We observe in rats and mice that if there's fewer toys, fewer or less social interaction in their environment, then their outer cortex doesn't develop as fast, right? They're pretty much left with the freeze and fight or flight functions, which means that those are more accessible, they're more likely to happen, right? That outer cortex is kind of a protective barrier for us, which can prove a problem as we may discuss later on. And then sleep deprivation. Sleep is the thing that cleans out our system, that really resets the machines, lets us wake up in the morning and divert energy to all those other functions. If we don't have it, then our bodies will divert everything to our lower brain. We're just gonna keep your heart and lungs moving. So those are the long-term stressors that an animal may experience out in the wild. But then you can also activate fight, flight, or freeze instantly, as we will observe in this video, which was actually kind of hard to find. Let's see. And there's no sound to it, so don't worry. So this impala gets caught by a cheetah, right? The cheetah is on it. Oh, you're not? Gosh, darn. Let me see if I can get that going. Yes, yes, very good. Okay, so we've got our impala there, and you can see its lungs. It's in freeze mode right now. The cheetah didn't kill it, right? But freeze mode was activated because impending death was happening, right? It had to shut down all of its nervous functions so it could have a nice painless death. But what is happening now is it moves through the same way it came. It went through fight or flight to get to that freeze state. It must come out of fight or flight to fully recover, to not have PTSD from this experience. It is literally processing its emotions right now as it shakes. It's kind of disturbing to watch in other mammals, but it's also actually pretty hard to watch in humans, which we'll discuss here in a minute. But like after it shakes everything out, its brain is integrating that the threat is no longer there, that it is safe, that it can now divert blood and resources to its peripheral muscles. It's going to get up, run away from the area to confirm, okay, everything's safe. I'm not actually getting chased by a cheetah anymore. So, back to our presentation here. Great.
Atera is the IT painkiller. Remote monitoring and management. Remote act.
Solve that problem. Well, it'll be okay. And so what about humans? What do these equivalents look like in humans? So we have our physical inputs, right? We need sleep, we need proper nutrition, right, to be able to power those outer brain functions. Physical activity is a signal to our body to power the other parts. Social interactions, that drives electrical activity up in the outer cortex. And then the stress inputs. That's going to determine, I guess, the opposite signals. What are the things to indicate that we shouldn't be diverting resources to non-essential functions? Right? Our past traumas and our current stressors. What are the bad things that have happened to us? What are the ways that we've been hurt before? Human brains are so smart. They are so excellent at retaining all emotional data, right? Because it's more important than cognitive data. And then what happens today? We can induce fight, flight, or freeze instantly in the same way that a cheetah can with an impala. All I have to do is shout you down until you stop talking. I can induce the freeze response. I can hold a gun to your head. That'll make you freeze. If one of you were to heckle me from the audience for a little bit, that would probably shut me down because I'm already kind of in the middle here. And all of those things are going to add up to tell your body if there's enough data for you to be anxious or depressed, right? In the same way that all the data is going to add up for a bear to go into hibernation. And then what about stress outlets? Are there ways to process this trauma? So if that cheetah stayed over the impala with its jaws over its jugular, the impala should have stayed frozen. That would have been the adaptive thing to do. It should have stayed depressed. Or if the impala saw that the cheetah walked 100 yards away and then just sat there, like maybe it would be adaptive to try and get up and run away and stay in fight or flight. But in this case, the cheetah was gone, the threat actually disappeared, and so it was adaptive for the impala to come out of freeze and start living its normal life, right? Back to business as usual. Do we have that as humans? Do we have that safe space to be able to come out of freeze? To be able to move through our shaking function, which is crying, right? Are we allowed to cry? I bet a lot of us in this room would say, no, I'm not allowed to, or at least I wasn't allowed to growing up. Do we have a safe social circle? Do we have the ability? Are we afraid of discharging those emotions? Has it become maladaptive to try and discharge those emotions? Were we punished for discharging those emotions? Does our brain hold that data to say, if you cry, you're going to get hurt, just like you did those other times in the past? And if the answer is no, you don't have those safe spaces, then by all means, please stay depressed, because it's not safe to come out of depression. Stay on your toes, stay anxious, keep walking on eggshells, because if you don't, you're gonna get hurt. Please keep that anxiety. And of course, we have another adaptation called dissociation, where we learn to retain some of our logical functioning while not experiencing fight, flight, or freeze. But again, we might talk about that one later. And then what about genes or chemical imbalances? How do those contribute to depression? And the answer is, guys, we actually don't know very much about those things. We've been using this term chemical imbalance for a long time, since the 80s. We actually don't know what that means. Like there are some, we can observe different average serotonin levels in somebody. It's easier to see difference in dopamine levels with certain conditions, but just because your serotonin levels are different than average doesn't actually mean you're going to be anxious or depressed. We don't see that in the research. And even if we did, was that serotonin imbalance produced from bullying? Was it produced from rape? Did you just spend a year in Afghanistan? Is that why your serotonin levels are down? And what do we know about genes? We have not identified any depression genes. We have identified some weak correlations with some genes that connect to other things. Like there's a gene that has some correlation with depression that makes it hard to process B12 vitamins. But it can actually be countered by just taking a B12 supplement. It doesn't cause depression. So, and I'll be happy to talk about that more if we have time later on. And so, how do we, as therapists, as family members, as friends, how do we help someone out of freeze? Well, we're working from the assumptions that the body wants to heal, right? Our body knows how to heal its own physical injuries. It's amazing how our bodies can just do that. And just like the impala knows how to heal its emotional injuries, our bodies do too. And if we feel like our bodies aren't working naturally, it's because something must have knocked them out of balance. Something must have made it adaptive to not heal. People don't want to be chronically depressed. One of the most frustrating situations as a therapist is to see someone in front of you who says, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Like, what's the point? And the thing is, this person actually doesn't want to be feeling the pain that they're feeling. But they're using their adaptive mechanisms, saying that they don't care, so I'll get off their case. And if I get off their case, like, maybe they'll change their tune. The environment has a real effect on our emotional health, right? We can enact real change, both in our homes and in a therapy office. And a lot of people, I think even the research for a long time, researchers have been really afraid to say that, hey, the strongest correlations to your mental health today are actually what traumas you had, your relationship with your parents, your relationship between your parents, and whether or not your parent had a mental health issue. These are the strongest correlations, the strongest determinants of somebody's current mental health. And our therapy models mostly are not based around fixing those things. They're mostly based around how do you change your negative thoughts? Right? How do you just change your behaviors? Which, as common factors research indicates, the model of therapy you use actually has a very small impact on whether or not you get better. And so we will use our 3-part brain model to talk about how we can create a real healing experience, meeting people where they are at in their brain, what that actually means. Just as we know that the impala needs space when it's in freeze, right? It needs to be allowed to shake it out when it's going through fight or flight on its way out. Humans need the same things. So depending on where my client's at, they're their ability to take in information, I might start with the basic model. Right? When somebody's in freeze and they only have access to their heart and lungs, you just let them breathe. You let them sit there. You don't try and make them do anything. Have you guys ever been in that state where you come home from work and you're like, I need nobody to talk to me right now? What it looks like when I come home, it's usually my job to do the dishes at the end of the day. I'll come home and I'll tell Kaprina, I'm gonna lay face down on the carpet right now for 15 minutes. And she says, okay, thanks for telling me, honey. And I am so grateful that she is supportive of my freeze response. And once somebody starts to get, once the lights start to turn on in their middle brain, because they realize, okay, pressure's off, we have enough oxygen in our blood, right? We can start to move higher in the brain. I'm going to start to have feelings, right? I'm going to start to tell her about how hard of a day it was. I'm going to experience my emotions, right? My body is going to experience those emotions. All emotions manifest in the body in some way, either in our muscles or our organs. And she's just going to sit there and she's just going to nod and say, honey, that's so hard, right? She's not going to try and fix any of it because I can't handle that, right? I'm down here. I don't have electricity in the logical part of my brain yet. So it means that if she were to try and teach me right now, it would feel offensive, right? If she were to try and fix it, try and give me logic right now, my body would react defensively, right? It'd move lower into its brain, go back into its hole. We might have an argument or something. Maybe I'd shut down and have to end up back on the ground. Okay, that didn't work. I need to go back in my hole. And this is how it works with our clients. If you find yourself arguing with a client, if you find yourself yanking, pulling teeth, it means you skipped a step. It means we're missing something here. They have a different need that needs to be met first. Once my clients are able to integrate that simple information, then we get a little bit more complicated, right? We recognize the difference between giving somebody space and listening to them, and the difference between listening to someone and validating their feelings. Some people don't want to hear, that's so hard, because then they'll be like, oh, as if you knew anything about it, right? You don't know anything. They don't want to hear sorry. Apologies go in that validation section. I don't want to hear your apologies right now, because you haven't listened to how you hurt me. What are you even apologizing for? No, I'm just mad at you, and I don't want to talk to you. So, that's real. That's not pathological for somebody to not want your apology. The next step above that, when you've listened well, right, let them run through those emotions without challenging them, you've validated them, let them know that their emotions are okay. It's okay to be thinking, feeling, whatever is going on here. I don't need to change that. Then, this person has a little bit of access to logic. You might ask something like, what do you think? What are your ideas? And more often than not, I'd say, clients know exactly what their solution is. They just needed to get back up to their logical brain to access it. Whereas if you were to try and give them the obvious solution before they were ready for it, they would just feel stupid, right? Feel like, oh, you didn't think that I knew that obvious solution, even as I was sitting here spouting off a whole bunch of irrational thoughts? The thing is, they actually probably do know their solution. And if they don't, then you offer your help. Gain consent to help someone. Unsolicited advice feels threatening. It makes your chest tighten. It makes your muscles flex. It makes you want to punch people, right? So let's give solicited advice. And then at the end of it all, when this person is calm, logical, then they can take in some challenges. They can take in some new thoughts, some challenges to their worldview. Right? That's when they can actually internalize it without needing to fight it. But you had to get them all the way up there first. And then, unfortunately, I don't think my handouts made it here. Oh, hey, my handouts made it here, guys. So this is the complete model that lets us know the difference between a couple of those freeze steps. that there's a difference between giving somebody total space and leaving the room, which I do sometimes in therapy, right? I say, hey, should I leave the room right now? And my clients say, yeah, like I really need to be just alone. And staying in the room with somebody and just sitting with them, but maybe not necessarily paying attention. I'm accessible, but I'm not staring at you. Because, sometimes people don't want to be stared at when they're in freeze mode. And paying attention, right? I'm paying attention to you. I'm looking at you. If you're with a family member, you might be just sitting there with a hand, rubbing their toes, scratching their back. But you're still not saying anything because their brain isn't ready for you to say anything yet. It's not ready for more stimulation than that. This is often the case with it's definitely the case with small children a lot. Like, they don't want you to leave the room, but they also don't want you to talk, right? It's very analogous with situations of borderline personality disorder, where the person doesn't want me to abandon them, but they also don't want me to say anything. And very common state for us to experience that kind of in-between freeze and fight or flight. And you can all take a closer look at this on the handout. And so what is it that keeps therapists and family members from being successful? Well, it's because we've been trained to be afraid of these things, to be afraid of emotional states. We enter our own fight or flight. We are down here. We don't have access to our own, clear logical functions, which is going to make us jump the gun. It's going to make it so that we can't address this person's needs effectively. We often skip to teaching and challenging somebody in an emotional state in order to try and make it go away, because we're afraid of it, not because there's something wrong with them. Like, we see this on TV shows with the naggy parent or the lecturing parent, and we think oh, that's so dumb, I would never do that. Guys, I still do that way too often in the therapy room, right? And with my kids. Sometimes we just want to take little jabs at our kids when they're throwing a tantrum, and that's my problem. We're afraid of silence. How many of us have sat for 40 minutes straight in silence in the therapy room? I applaud you if you've been able to hold out for that long. It is a scary experience, but so often at the end of it, the person will come out of their emotional state and say, thank you so much for just being here with me and shutting up. I feel so much better now. And you're like, you almost suffocated on the silence. But it's exactly what that person needed. And so we need to train ourselves to be able to handle that silence. I regret that one time in graduate school, I was sitting with a woman who was crying for 5 minutes. And my supervisor came, knocked on the door, pulled me out of the room and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm letting her cry." And she's like, "Don't do that." I now know that was totally wrong. This woman needed to cry, right? I don't need to stop someone's natural healing response from happening because I'm afraid of it, or even because my supervisor's afraid of it. So our own anxiety, it prevents us from meeting them where they're at. It prevents boundaries from happening. In that 10-step model, we have boundaries at the top. Somebody is in the best place to receive rules and boundaries when they're up at the top. Oh, thank you. My wife is giving me feedback as we go. Thank you. Boundaries always need to exist. You always need to keep yourself safe, regardless of the state that this person is in. If you can hold off until they're higher up in their brain, great, but the principle is you need to be safe. There are some cases where this person, if this person transitions out of freeze, then they're going to enter a fight state, right, where they might be physically harmful. They might be aggressive. And maybe you actually don't have the resources to withstand what happens when they come out of freeze, right? Or as a therapist, you might not be able to withstand the poisonous words that'll come out of their mouth when they finally feel safe enough to tell you what's actually going on inside. Maybe you're afraid. You're afraid of suicidal ideation. I know that I was for a really long time until I'd gotten more experience with it and my own therapy to process my own anxiety about it. Because when people are expressing suicidal ideation, they need you to listen. They need you to validate that feeling, that scariest of all feelings, hopelessness and suicidality. Not say, okay, we got to call the hospital. Because who knows how far up the steps you might help this person get to before we even have to set a boundary. It's amazing what you'll learn if you can stick it out. I've just got a couple other examples here. Common ones I see is a parent at home trying to set boundaries. Their kid is staying home from school because they say they're feeling depressed, and the parent says all right, that's fine. But to help you with that depression, we're going to take away the distractions. No phone, no video games. The teenager blows up on the parent and they get scared. There's they can't handle their child being angry at them, and so they give them the distractions, the things that actually keep somebody from moving through an emotional response. Or a child throwing a tantrum in the grocery store. You're so afraid of what's going on around you that you're going to give in, you're going to give that kid the candy because it's too scary to have other people look at you with your child having a tantrum in the grocery store. So we might not have the resources or conditions. We might get tricked. Some people are really good at conveying that they are in a calm, logical state, that they're up here, but they're actually not. And so you'll need to read all the cues. You need to gather all the data to determine where's this person actually, right? Maybe they'll sit there acting like they're in a logical state, but one of their muscles is flexed. Maybe they're tapping their foot really hard, or maybe their eyebrows are like this. Chronically. It's always fun when I say, what's going on up here? And they're like, oh, they're just always like that. I'm like, oh. Let's figure that out. What happens when you unflex those? And a lot of times they'll start crying or they'll feel sick to their stomach or something because they're able to maintain the facade by flexing something. Right? And we do this in various sorts of ways, using stress balls, fidgeting. It keeps the emotion at bay, right? Cases of OCD. This one, this is one that I've had to work through quite a bit, because some of the folks with OCD will come in with lots of questions, asking advice. What do I do in this situation? What do I do in this situation? And it makes me feel really smart to answer what the best thing is to do in that situation. But I realize after a while that, wait a second, they're not actually internalizing the principle here. It means that this logical facade, this logical behavior is actually trying to help them avoid shame, help them avoid some sort of anxiety. I've missed the point, because every time I try and give them the answer to that question, it's the assurance, right? It's giving into the compulsion. The hard thing to do is to sit there and say, I have my ideas about that, but what are you really afraid of in this question? Or it sounds like you're asking, where's the point where I am shameful? Where's the point that makes me bad? That's something that I really have come to internalize recently. Sit with my own anxiety and my own, desire to look really smart in answering people's questions. And that's what dissociation is. Dissociation is the disconnection from the emotion, right? To maintain the appearance of calm, safe, logical, when really there's something else going on. And so, the last thing before I wanted to open it up to questions is I wanted to show you the brain in the bucket. This is a diagram I use a lot with my clients to help them conceptualize where they're at in their brain and why they're there, right? By quantifying their stress. In our stress bucket, we have our daily stress, which is what happened to you today? What cheetahs chased you today, right? What did your boss say? What did your spouse say? What's the weather like? Is anybody sick today? And does that bring you over the edge? We have our systemic stress. Systemic stress is, what are we going to wake up to in the morning? What's my job like? What's my schooling like? What's my family like? What cultural or economic pressures are there going on around me? That will determine our systemic stress. And then our trauma. What are the things from my past that I don't want to think about? Right, that still hurt, that still evoke emotions. And oftentimes, quantifying these things can help determine a person's diagnosis, right? Like if we sit there and say, when you're on vacation, or let me start with this one. I have kids who are depressed or anxious when they're, say, living at one parent's house in a case of divorce, but are not when they're living at another parent's house. This is a systemic issue, right? The child feels flooded here, but not flooded here, right? And like with college students, sometimes we just like, hey, you just need to drop a couple classes and your depression will go away. Like, awesome. For folks dealing with some daily stressors, sometimes they just need a few coping mechanisms to control that daily stress. Like, and if that's the case, great. But if you're a person who still feels flooded when you are on vacation, when you have no systemic stressors, then it looks like we're dealing with trauma, right? Because you wake up in the morning and your trauma, like your stress levels are already on the edge of flooding, then it means this isn't a systemic issue, because it doesn't matter where you are, you're still feeling anxious or depressed. And so, I guess I forgot to say at the beginning, it's as we move toward the edge of the bucket that we get on edge. And once the bucket floods over, then we feel flooded. So I think that's where I wanted to stop here, guys, and just open it up to your thoughts and your questions. I've got a number of other slides that are kind of contingency plans, depending on where the conversation goes. But I'd like to open it up to you guys now.
So I actually just want to say thank you for acknowledging the chemical imbalance and the gene piece of things. Once you brought that up, I was like, please don't say that there's a chemical imbalance thing, because so many of our clients come in and they say, well, I'm depressed because my family's depressed and my grandparents are depressed. But you hit on the point of, well, what's going on that's leading to that depression? I think that's a huge thing for us as clinicians and even family and friends saying this, there's nothing wrong with you. Something's going on to you or for you. So thank you so much for acknowledging that and not continuing the problem of, oh, it's a chemical imbalance. So thank you for that.
Yeah, when I was looking into that, I ran into a study that showed people who believe in like strongly in genetic or chemical causes are actually less likely to get better. Like that result kind of disproving the belief itself. Right.
I'd also like to thank you for the STEP method. Helps us keep, as mental health professionals, keep us on the right step and not skip steps, because we probably all know how that goes, like your experience. You mentioned that the gazelle he entered freeze from fight and flight, and he had to exit freeze from fight and flight, and that was possibly the body protecting itself from PTSD. Is there any evidence behind that, or is that a theory, or I'd like to know more about that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess on the theoretical level, this is something you can observe in somebody processing their trauma, regardless of the method that you use. When you are processing a trauma with somebody, they are re-experiencing the same physiological reaction that they experienced during the event. And I guess this kind of goes into a deeper argument as to whether or not somebody is better from something. Because sometimes people can say that they feel better about a trauma because they've done really well at blocking it out. They've worked really hard to just forget about it, not think about it, distract themselves from it, and so they're not experiencing the symptoms. And they might say, I've recovered, and I didn't have to go through that painful, physiological response. At least in my experience as a therapist, whenever I've seen somebody do that, it's always come back, right? It always comes back to get them. But if I've seen them like experience the physiological response of that, of their trauma, then I can observe as I watch them recount the story again, whether or not they're like trying to fake it, detach from it, or whether or not they are experiencing kind of a resolved sense of grief, like, yeah, this thing really happened to me, and I don't get panics when I think about it anymore. And so I guess to address that question effectively, like, yes, this is what we do see in people getting better, but there is the argument of like, but are they better if they've done a good job of coping with it? Mm-hmm. Right. I'll give a list of some reading material after this, but this idea of having to move through the emotional response, like it's existed since Freud, but polyvagal theory, somatic experiencing models, EMDR, are all, I guess, evidence of the idea. We got someone there in the back?
Can you just explain the systemic area again on the bucket?
Yeah, systemic
Thanks.
stress. So systemic stress involves the things that are going on around me, like kind of the guaranteed source of stressors that I will face when I wake up in the morning. So if I wake up and I know that maybe I am, like, one, I'm in a really hard schooling program right now, right? And that's weighing on me. My marriage is on the rocks right now, and that's weighing on me. I'm in a low socioeconomic status right now, and that's weighing on me. I am isolated. I don't have many family members that I can reach out to. That's a systemic stressor. And if I were to take those things away and my stress goes down, then it means it was, in fact, systemic, right? Like if I dropped all my classes and I'm like, oh, wow, I feel so free. Or like if I end that toxic relationship and I'm like, oh, this feels amazing, right? To not be manipulated all the time. Then that was a systemic stressor. Yeah. Yes.
I just had a question about the stair steps. And as therapists, when we notice that we're skipping steps, because we have 50 minutes,
Yeah.
what would you suggest in terms of catching those errors and maybe filling those gaps, either in the moment or later? I know that, with supervision or with accountability, but also just what are your thoughts about that for clinicians that are aware, hey, we're skipping steps?
Yeah. That is a great question. And this is a hard one because there's so much that we want to get done over the course of that 50 minutes. I know that for me, like I feel this anxiety to have a home run session every time, like some life-changing insight, right? Or to break this person open and to unleash a lot of their, oppressive, painful emotions. But in that moment where we find ourselves, right, down in our middle brain, where we are anxious, where we are antsy, where we are feeling pressure to do something, it means that we have an issue in ourselves that we need to resolve, more than likely. And I wouldn't just say supervision, right, to be able to point that out and talk about that with someone else, but we ourselves as therapists need to have therapy, right? We need to have stress outlets. We need to have our own safe places where we can move through these emotions ourselves. Because when we move through those emotions and we come out alive and unhurt, then we become less afraid of those things, right? So like the example of this impala, we don't see animals developing like excessive fear of predators. They kind of maintain the same amount of fear of predators because they learn like, hey, it doesn't mean death, right? It doesn't mean the end of it all because I went through the entire emotion cycle. So as therapists, when we learn, okay, it's 30 minutes in to the session, we haven't gotten anywhere yet, I'm all riled up, I actually need to take 5 minutes out in the bathroom. Would that be okay? I go out, I take 5 minutes, I breathe, get oxygen back into my brain. I come back and say, you know, tell you the truth, I'm actually not in a place to talk about this thing that you came in with today. It's really hard for a therapist to do that, to say, I'll actually need to work on this inside myself before I come back and help you with it. It's okay to not approach things if you're not in a place to do good in that situation. And sometimes we need therapy. Sometimes I needed to cry for an hour straight myself to be able to internalize that.
What's the connection between stress and depression?
Great question. So I think a simple way to think about it is if stress is inescapable or overwhelming, like far too overstimulating, then your body knows to shut down. Like, any way to escape this pain? No. All right. Shut down into the whole mode. Or it's like stressor, then your body can't process all that data. It knows, okay, this is too hard. Shut down. Yeah, so the inevitability and the quantity of stress will determine the freeze response. Yes, Caprina.
I've been practicing with Boone, with my clients, using the steps for a while now, and I just wanted to say, it's actually so exciting to me when I get to the point with a client where they've been depressed for a long time, and we're creating space, we're taking time, we're trying to create systemic change so that the emotion can come out, that there's some level of acceptance of the depression, and then all of a sudden they emerge and they're like, I have had so much anxiety this week. And then we remind ourselves, okay, so you're moving up through the brain, this is excellent. And part of utilizing the tool of the steps for me is always training my clients on it so that they can kind of understand where I see the case probably moving. I can't give them a timeline. I can't promise what exactly it's going to look like for them, but feeling assured that the anxiety as they emerge from depression is normal, that can be so helpful and encouraging. Anyways, I love this model.
Thanks. Okay, maybe this is not related and you can just say that. I'm just trying to comprehend, like when you're talking about divorce, like two different situations. Sometimes you see the kid presenting really well in one house, and then in the other house, they're breaking down all the time. And I've heard, and I don't know if it's true, that it's sometimes because the house they're breaking down at is safer. I don't know if that's true, and I don't know how this relates to this stress model.
So, you've cracked open a giant box, which, well, like, again, we'll see how much we can do in the time here. So, what I showed you guys today was just one half, right? That didn't include dissociation. But dissociation is very real and present in all of us in some way, and all of our clients, often much more than we know. I highly recommend screening your clients for dissociative symptoms. You might learn something. But like, this child might be presenting as very well in that more treacherous environment if it is not okay for them to be frozen. If they're not allowed to feel depressed, they're not allowed to feel their strong emotions, then they're actually going to come, or at least as I conceptualize that on my model here, they'll come out the other side in a state of logic, calm, functionality, but there's always side effects to that adaptation, right? Because they're further away from their empathy, right? Like, they're talking logically, but there's a lot of things that don't add up. There's some missing logic here. That's how we know dissociation is present. This child is dissociating to adapt. And so it may be the case that if they're crying and breaking down and going through their emotional responses in that other environment, it means, okay, like, they're allowed to move through the emotional responses because it's safe enough to do so.
So this may be a different seminar, but I'm wondering, as you work with clients through freeze and fight or flight, do you teach them ways to work through that? I mean, when you say, okay, they're in freeze, they just need to be alone, sit, or do you teach them breathing ways, or what types of things do you see that work well in freeze or fight or flight to help them in those places?
Yeah. So one is educating them about that and normalizing it. Say, like, hey, this is going to happen. This is probably what you're going to feel, and it's going to be really hard. And one, we don't have to do this all at once, right? We don't have to go over the waterfall or through the black hole or whatever other analogy you want to use, like super fast or all at the same time. It's possible to break this up. It's possible to moderate the flow of emotions. Like you can imagine if this is a river that we're going down, like we can have a paddle and we can dock on the side of the river. We can calm it down, right? We can paddle backwards a little bit. EMDR is a model very much based around the modification of emotional flow, right? So that it doesn't overwhelm people. Letting them know that, yeah, we can divert, docking on the side of the river is kind of like, all right, we're gonna pause now from that traumatic story and we're just gonna breathe. I'm just gonna have you focus on your heart and lungs. Or here's some essential oils, or here's a stress ball, or let's do the 5 senses. Just help them. The reason they haven't moved through these is because they haven't felt safe before doing it. So it's our job to be the guide on the river, to help them feel safe going through the rapids and over the waterfalls. And let them know that they have autonomy over it, that they can choose to do this, and how fast and how much.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
No pressure. I'm just wondering, we both work at the Children's Justice Center, and we do therapy, but it's very short term. Yeah. And so I'm loving this. But obviously it's a slower process. It's a longer process. So what would be your best suggestion of, kind of where we work with as far as just a short term, trying to get them into a more permanent place, but, how can we use this when it's shorter term?
First of all, thank you for your work. And that is one of the hardest situations to try and determine, because there are some therapy cases where you are literally trying to teach someone to dissociate better, to keep from getting injured. Right. How can I distract you from the pain that's inevitably going to come to you? Or are you trying to decide in that situation, does this child just need one data point of a trusting adult that will listen to them? Will that be helpful to them most at this moment? Is there some sort of trauma that we can work through over the course of 2 or 3 sessions that are 30 minutes long? I don't know. And so I can just hope that you are you're working to stay on top of your game, have the most mental clarity to try and make a wise decision as to where to take this child on the river in that short period of time. Thanks so much. I guess I'll show you a quick slide with, some of the books that you can look at that can really hammer in these ideas. One I didn't put on there is just Immeld and Wampold's 2015 book about the common factors. Common factors research is one of the, strongest evidences of just creating safe places for people to be effective in therapy. Again, all this stuff isn't new. We've seen it before in other kinds of diagrams, the upside down triangle from Bruce Perry, Dan Siegel's 3-part model, the peace pyramid, for those of you who are familiar with that. They are all going at the same concept, but I condensed them and added specifics to these different levels to make it more applicable, to therapy and other real life situations. And then that's how you can get in touch with me if you'd like to. Thanks so much, guys. And it's lunchtime right now, so those of you who actually paid to be here get lunch, and that's really awesome. I'll be sticking around on the stage for a little bit. Okay.
Thank
I
you.
actually don't know the code. Do you know the code?
I do know the code. So thank you, first of all, to Boone Christensen for sharing his knowledge and experience. And thank you to those of you also for coming and participating. If you would like to earn CEU credit for this session, you'll just go onto the conference portal, click this session, and take the survey. And the code word for this session is SIMPLE, spelled SIMPLE. We are going to have a lunch break now. The food court is kind of like directly behind us. There's a long, just kind of like series of restaurants you can choose from. And then we hope you can join us back at 1:30 for the plenary speaker in the ballroom, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. Thank you.